In the heat of prehistoric South America, the land trembled under the steps of a predator few dared to challenge. The Allosaurus, with its low skull-sharp teeth and swift body, was more than a hunter. It was a shadow moving between dense trees and open plains, a silent force that struck terror in every creature that crossed its path. Its eyes held hunger, its stance carried dominance, and its roar echoed through valleys as a warning. In this world, survival was not given. It was taken, and Allosaurus always took what wanted. The story of the Allosaurus begins in the Cretaceous period, when the world was alive with countless species, all locked in a constant struggle for survival. The land was warm and fertile with dense forests that stretched across valleys and rivers that carved paths through the heart of South America. Here life thrived, but life also ended swiftly. Every shadow could hide a predator, and every step forward could be the last. In this place, the Allosaurus emerged not as the largest predator, but as one of the most cunning and relentless. Its size allowed it to be quick, and its body was built for agility more than brute force. Unlike the massive beast that relied on weight and intimidation, the Allosaurus depended on precision. It chose its battles with care, striking when advantage was certain, and retreating when danger outweighed reward. The Allosaurus stood about 6 meters long and carried itself with a low, streamlined body. Its skull was narrow-lined with sharp teeth that could tear through flesh with frightening efficiency. Its forelimbs were short yet powerful, while its legs were built for speed. Every muscle moved in harmony, designed to chase down prey across open land or weave between thick brush. To smaller herbivores, it was a nightmare. To larger dinosaurs, it was a thief, striking at the young or the weak when opportunity arose. This balance between caution and aggression was what allowed the Allosaurus to flourish in a dangerous world. It did not need to be the biggest. It only needed to be the most adaptable. The environment around it was alive with diversity. Herds of sauropods moved slowly across plains, shaking the ground beneath them. Armored dinosaurs grazed in groups, relying on shells and spines to keep predators at bay. Flocks of smaller creatures darted through undergrowth, seeking safety in speed and numbers. Above, pterosaurs ruled the skies, scanning below for scraps left behind by hunters like the Allosaurus. Rivers filled with crocodile-like reptiles, and schools of fish fed both land and air dwellers. It was a world of constant tension where survival demanded focus and instinct every moment of the day. What made the Allosaurus distinct was not only its physical design, but also its behavior. It did not rely on brute strength, but on planning. Fossil evidence suggests that it may have hunted in pairs or small groups, using cooperation to drive prey into traps. Even when alone, it showed patience, waiting for the right moment to strike instead of charging recklessly. This blend of speed, intelligence, and endurance made it a formidable predator. In its world, hesitation meant starvation, and recklessness meant death. So the Allosaurus survived by mastering balance. Yet survival was not without challenge. Larger predators also roamed the land, and competition for food was fierce. Carnivores like Allosaurus and Carnotaurus shared its territory, each with their own strengths. The Allosaurus had to measure itself constantly against rivals that could crush it if confronted directly. Its advantage lay in its ability to avoid open conflict and exploit weakness where others did not. In this way, it carved out a role for itself in a world ruled by titans. It was not king of the land, but it was a silent prince of strategy, thriving in the shadows of giants. The tale of the Allosaurus is more than the story of a predator. It is a story of survival in one of the harshest ages Earth has ever seen. Every step it took was a test. Every hunt was a risk. Every victory was temporary, because hunger always returned. Yet it lived on, shaping its legacy not through sheer might, but through adaptation and persistence. Its world may have vanished millions of years ago, but in the stone record its story remains preserved. And within that story lies the spirit of a creature that defined its era through stealth, cunning, and unyielding will. The morning sun broke across the horizon, bathing the prehistoric land in gold. The herds were already on the move. Massive sauropods lumbered slowly across the open plain, while smaller ornithopods darted between ferns and shrubs, searching for tender shoots. The air was thick with sound. The bellowing of distant giants, the calls of smaller creatures, the rustle of life stirring all around. For the Allosaurus, this day would begin like any other, but within hours its life would be pushed into new and dangerous territory. The Allosaurus crouched low in the undergrowth. Its nostrils flared as it inhaled the scent of a nearby herd of hadrosaurs. These duck-billed herbivores traveled in large numbers. The herd was restless as they made their way toward a water source. Their sheer size and numbers made them difficult targets. Still among them were the weak and the young. For a predator like the Allosaurus, opportunity always lived at the edge of risk. The predator's yellow eyes narrowed on a juvenile near the fringe of the herd. It limped slightly, favoring one leg. To the Allosaurus, this was not weakness to pity, but weakness to exploit. It shifted its body low, its tail balancing each step as it crept closer. The wind was in its favor, carrying the scent of the herd away from its prey. Silence wrapped around its movements until only the beating of its heart seemed to echo in its chest. But the hunt was not without competition. A shadow flickered in the distance. Another predator. The ground quivered under heavier footsteps, and soon the shape of a Carnotaurus appeared at the edge of the clearing. Taller and more muscular than the Allosaurus, the Carnotaurus relied on raw speed and power. Its eyes locked on the same target. Two predators, two strategies, one vulnerable hadrosaur. The fragile balance of survival tilted toward chaos. The Allosaurus hesitated. To confront the Carnotaurus directly would mean almost certain death. Yet to retreat was to lose a meal it desperately needed. Hunger gnawed inside its belly, sharp and demanding. The dry season had begun and prey was harder to bring down. Every hunt mattered, and every choice left consequences. It had survived this long not by recklessness, but by timing. And now, timing was everything. The hadrosaur herd shifted suddenly, their heads rising in alarm. The scent of predators carried on the wind, and their calls rang out as they bunched together in defense. The limping juvenile struggled to keep up, pressed against the outer ring of adults. The Carnotaurus growled low, a guttural sound that shook the air before it lunged forward. The herd broke into a thunder of pounding feet as dust filled the sky. This was the moment. The Allosaurus sprang from the brush, cutting across the path of the fleeing juvenile. Its lean body darted with precision, weaving between the panicked adults. Its jaws snapped forward, seizing flesh as the young hadrosaur cried out. But before it could secure its grip, the Carnotaurus barreled into the chaos. Its massive head swung with brutal force, knocking an adult aside as though it were nothing. Its eyes blazed with fury, fixed on both the prey and the smaller rival that dared to challenge its claim. The clash was inevitable. The Allosaurus retreated a step, its claws digging into the dirt as it circled. The Carnotaurus roared, shaking the ground with its authority. Yet in that chaos something vital shifted. The herd scattered more wildly now, leaving the injured juvenile momentarily exposed. Hunger flared hotter than fear in the Allosaurus. It darted again, narrowly avoiding the Carnotaurus, snapping jaws. Its teeth tore into the juvenile's flank, drawing blood as the larger predator lunged too late. But the victory was not clean. The Carnotaurus struck again, this time its massive skull grazing the Allosaurus side. Pain ripped through its body, and the smaller predator tumbled back. The juvenile collapsed, bleeding in the dust between them. For a breathless moment, predator faced predator, each unwilling to yield. Then the herd vanished over the horizon, leaving only dust, blood, and the choice of who would survive this contest. This was the inciting moment. The Allosaurus had not just challenged a rival. It had entered into a struggle that would define its survival in the days ahead. The hunt was no longer about one meal. It was about learning to exist in the shadow of stronger predators, and about claiming its place in a world where hesitation meant death. The sun drifted higher into the sky, pouring heat across the dry expanse. The Allosaurus limped slightly from the gash left by the Carnotaurus skull, but the wound was shallow compared to the hunger gnawing inside. It retreated from the chaos of the herd and settled in the shadow of low ferns, its flanks rising and falling with heavy breaths. The taste of blood lingered in its mouth, yet no true victory had been won. The juvenile hadrosaur escaped in confusion, leaving the predator with nothing but pain and frustration. For hours the Allosaurus lingered near a stream, drinking deeply, while watching the tree line for signs of danger. Its instincts demanded caution. To heal required patience, yet the landscape around it showed no mercy. Herds moved restlessly across the plains, always pursued by the scent of death carried by larger predators. It was not enough to be swift or cunning. In this land, survival meant constant vigilance. The Allosaurus had grown in the shadow of bigger killers. The Carnotaurus with its raw power. The Allosaur cousins that claimed territories near the rivers. Even raptors hunted in coordinated packs, striking fear with their cunning. But the Allosaurus was not without strength. Its speed gave it advantage, its keen senses sharper than many. Where others relied on brute force, it lived by precision. This adaptability was its true weapon, and in the weeks ahead, it would be tested more than ever. As the dry season deepened, the waterholes shrank. Herds clashed over dwindling vegetation. Crocodilian giants lurked in the shrinking lakes, snapping at the thirsty. The Allosaurus watched from the fringes, never reckless, but always observant. Hunger carved deeper lines across its ribs. It tracked smaller prey like ornithopods and young ceratopsians, yet competition was relentless. Time after time, its hunts were interrupted by stronger predators who forced it away from kills. One evening, as twilight bled across the horizon, the Allosaurus stalked a lone juvenile iguanodont, separated from its group. Its muscles rippled with anticipation as it crept through the tall grasses. Every step brought it closer, every breath measured. Then a shriek split the air. From the trees emerged a pair of raptors, their eyes gleaming with collective hunger. They circled the iguanodon from the opposite side, trapping it between them. The Allosaurus growled, low warning them off, but the raptors ignored it. They darted as one, slashing with sickle claws, tearing at the herbivore's flanks. The Allosaurus lunged in fury, snapping at one of them. Its jaws clamped down, catching only air as the agile hunter leapt back. The second raptor seized a chance to rake claws across the Allosaurus' thigh. Pain flared, yet rage fueled its counterattack. It spun with speed faster than the raptors anticipated, its tail lashing like a whip. One raptor was knocked sprawling into the dust, shrieking in pain. The juvenile iguanodont fled, stumbling into the darkness. The kill was lost, but the Allosaurus had made its point. The surviving raptors hissed before retreating into the shadows, dragging their wounded companion. Alone, the Allosaurus panted, heavy breath steam rising from its flanks. It had defended its ground, yet once again hunger lingered unsatisfied. Each encounter carved a sharper edge into its instincts. It was no longer simply about feeding. It was about carving out space in a world of rivals. Days passed. The wound on its side scabbed and healed, though scar tissue stiffened its stride. The world around it pressed harder. Prey grew thinner as herds migrated north to find water. The Allosaurus followed, yet so too did predators. Conflict was unavoidable. At a wide-open clearing near a dried riverbed, it found itself facing competition again. This time it was no Carnotaurus, no raptor pack. Instead, it was a massive Allosaurus cousin heavier than the Allosaurus, with jaws built for crushing bone. A carcass lay between them, a fallen sauropod calf too weak to survive the harsh season. Its body was still fresh blood darkening the soil. The Allosaurus had tracked the scent for hours, only to find itself sharing the discovery with this formidable rival. The Allosaurus lowered its head, bellowing a guttural challenge. The Allosaurus bristled feathers along its back, rising as it circled. The decision was not simple. To fight could mean death, yet to retreat was to starve. The Allosaurus hissed, jaws snapping with warning. The Allosaurus lunged forward, biting deep into the carcass and tearing away flesh. Its eyes never left the smaller predator, daring it to approach. The Allosaurus circled faster, testing the larger hunter's reflexes. Every movement was measured, not reckless. When the Allosaurus bent low for another mouthful, the Allosaurus struck. It darted forward, seizing a strip of flesh before leaping back out of reach. The larger predator roared in fury, lunging after it. Dust spiraled as claws toward the ground. The Allosaurus barely escaped, its snapping jaws ducking behind the carcass before retreating into the shadows. The strategy worked. While the Allosaurus gorged itself, the Allosaurus stole fragments whenever it found an opening. It ate little compared to the giant, but enough to survive another day. When the rival finally dragged the remains deeper into the forest, the smaller predator retreated, satisfied though its body trembled with exhaustion. With every confrontation, the Allosaurus learned. It could not rely on strength. It had to outthink its rivals. Its place in this world was forged not through dominance but through cunning. The land grew harsher. Storms swept across the plains, tearing apart vegetation. Lightning fires burned through sections of the forest. Herds panic stampeding across rivers where crocodiles waited. The Allosaurus endured each trial, moving always forward. One fateful dusk, the predator came across a scene that would change everything. A herd of hadrosaurs had clustered around a shrinking lake, their bodies pushed close together, nervous and restless. The Allosaurus crept closer, expecting to find them driven by thirst. But as it neared, it saw something more. At the far edge of the water stood the Carnotaurus. Its massive body loomed like a living shadow, horns catching the fading light, and beside it another rival predator equally fearsome. Together, they threatened the herd with coordinated menace. The Allosaurus froze. This was no ordinary hunt. Something had shifted in the balance of the plains. Larger predators had begun pressing closer to water and food sources, leaving smaller hunters like itself little ground. Every step forward brought greater peril, yet it also brought sharper purpose. For the Allosaurus, survival was no longer about scraping scraps from rivals. It was about seizing opportunity in the face of giants. The tension of the plains thickened. Rivals loomed larger, prey grew scarcer, and every decision carried heavier weight. Each hunt now was a gamble, each step a test. And deep within its chest, the Allosaurus knew the time would come when hesitation would end not with hunger, but with death. The storm that would ignite its greatest battle was drawing near. The night was restless. Thunder growled above the plains, and flashes of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the silhouettes of herds pressed together in fear. The air smelled of rain, and smoke for a storm had passed earlier, igniting fires in the brushlands. The land was scarred yet alive, and in this chaos predators thrived. The Allosaurus crept through the wet grass, its body low and tense. Hunger had sharpened its senses to a razor edge. Its ribs pressed against skin, and every step carried the urgency of survival. It had tracked a herd of hadrosaurs to a waterhole where they huddled in nervous groups, their calls echoing across the night. They were weak, tired, and driven to desperation by the scarcity of resources. To the Allosaurus, this was opportunity. But the plains were not generous. It was never alone in its hunt. From the shadows, another shape emerged, massive and terrifying. The Carnotaurus stepped into the clearing, its horns gleaming in the stormlight, its chest heaving with power. The larger predator bellowed a roar that silenced the herd, sending panic through the air. The hadrosaur stampeded, splashing through the mud, fleeing in every direction. The Allosaurus froze. This was the rival it had encountered before, the beast that had scarred its flank. Every instinct screamed to run, yet its body refused. Hunger and instinct forced it to stay. Tonight would be different. Tonight hesitation would mean death. The Carnotaurus charged into the herd, scattering the hadrosaurs with brutal force. Its jaws snapped shut on empty air as prey dodged and scattered. The Allosaurus saw its chance. It darted into the chaos, singling out a smaller hadrosaur separated from the group. Its claws raked across the prey's flank, drawing blood. The hadrosaur cried out, stumbling. The kill was within reach. Then the ground shook. The Carnotaurus swung back its massive head, lowering its horns toward the Allosaurus. The smaller predator barely twisted aside as the charged thunder passed. Mud splashed, and the hadrosaur bolted away, leaving both predators glaring at each other across the clearing. Rain hammered the earth, lightning split the sky, and the battle for survival began. The Carnotaurus lunged, jaws wide, snapping for the Allosaurus' neck. The smaller predator leapt back, agile and quick. It countered with a slash from its claws across the giant's snout, leaving shallow marks that only enraged it further. With a bellow, the Carnotaurus swung its massive skull sideways. The impact caught the Allosaurus along its ribs, throwing it sprawling into the mud. Pain flared bright and hot, yet instinct forced up again before the killing blow could land. The Allosaurus circled, panting heavily. It could not outmatch the Carnotaurus in strength. One mistake would end everything. Speed and precision were its only weapons. The larger predator lunged again, tearing great chunks of earth with every step. The Allosaurus waited until the last possible second, then twisted aside, jaws snapping at the vulnerable underside of the neck. Teeth sank deep, drawing blood. The The Carnotaurus roared, thrashing wildly, to shake it loose. The Allosaurus held fast until a violent shake flung it free. It landed hard, rolling through the mud, but scrambled back to its feet. Blood streaked its muzzle. It had drawn first blood, but the battle was far from over. The Carnotaurus charged again, this time with relentless fury. Its horns gouged the earth, narrowly missing their mark each time. The smaller predator dodged again, and again using its agility to wear down the larger rival. But each dodge drained its strength, each miss brought the Carnotaurus closer. Finally, the giant cornered it against a cluster of boulders. There was no escape. The Carnotaurus lowered its head and charged with thunderous speed. At the last instant, the Allosaurus leapt upward, planting its claws against the predator's skull, using its momentum to vault over the charging beast. The horns smashed into the rock face with bone-shattering force. Dust and debris exploded around them. The Carnotaurus staggered, dazed by the impact. The Allosaurus seized a chance. It lunged with every ounce of strength, sinking its teeth into the wounded neck again and again, tearing at flesh. Blood poured into the mud, staining the stormlit ground. The giant roared, shaking violently, but its movement slowed as exhaustion and blood loss weakened it. With a final desperate thrash, the Carnotaurus collapsed onto its side. The ground trembled with its fall. Its chest rose and fell in ragged breaths before going still. Silence returned, broken only by the patter of rain. The Allosaurus stood over the fallen giant chest, heaving eyes blazing with triumph and exhaustion. Its body was torn and bruised, scars burning with pain, yet it remained alive. Against all odds, a smaller hunter had conquered the apex. It had not only survived, but claimed a victory that few of its kind would ever know. For a moment it stood still to stormlight, casting its shadow long across the plains. This was no longer just a struggle for food. It was proof of what it had become. Not the strongest, not the largest, but a predator forged by cunning, speed, and resilience. When the rain finally ceased, the Allosaurus fed on its fallen rival. Hunger at last was quieted. Yet more than flesh had been won that night. In its survival, it had carved a place for itself in a land where only the fiercest endured. The storm had ended, but the world remained merciless. New rivals would come. New battles would rise. But for now, the Allosaurus stood victorious. It had stared into the jaws of death and emerged as more than a survivor. It was a hunter reborn by fire and storm. The sun slipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The land lay quiet after storms of battle, and reigned its stillness, carrying a strange weight. Across the plains, the Allosaurus walked slow, but steady, its frame marked by fresh scars, yet powered by new strength. Each step pressed into the soft earth, leaving prints that told the story of survival. It moved away from the sight of the Carnotaurus carcass, the echoes of the fight fading behind it. Scavengers would strip the fallen giant to bone until nothing remained but a memory written in the soil. But for the Allosaurus, the battle had carved something deeper. It was more than just the defeat of a rival. It was proof that even a smaller predator could rise against overwhelming odds and endure. As the predator crossed into rolling hills dotted with scrub and trees, it paused to drink from a stream. The water ran cold and clear, washing blood from its muzzle. Ripples spread across the surface as its reflection shimmered back. The image that stared up was no longer just a lean hunter clinging to survival. It was something hardened and relentless, a creature that had faced a storm and lived. Beyond the hills, herds grazed, cautiously returning to the plains after the chaos. Hadrosaurs lowered their heads to drink, while small groups of armored dinosaurs picked at low plants. The Allosaurus watched from the shadows, muscles tensing, as instinct whispered the eternal call of the hunt. Yet hunger did not drive it this time. Its belly was full, and its wounds urged rest. For now it observed, silent and patient, letting the moment pass. Night fell again, bringing cool winds across the land. Stars emerged in the sky, bright and sharp above the dark horizon. The predator lay curled beneath a ridge, its sides rising and falling in slow rhythm. Each breath carried the faint ache of scars, but also the promise of tomorrow. Dreams stirred in its mind, not of fear, but of dominance over challenges that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, the plains shifted into their usual rhythm. Prey herds moved along ancient paths, feeding and migrating with the seasons. New predators tested their strength in ambush and chase. Life continued its endless cycle of pursuit and survival. Yet in that balance, the Allosaurus held its place stronger than before. It no longer avoided shadows cast by larger rivals. It had faced one of the mightiest and claimed victory. That memory became its armor, as much as the scars that lined its body. Storms would come again. Rivals would rise again. Prey would resist, and seasons would shift. The world of the Cretaceous was never still, never forgiving. But for the Allosaurus, each day was no longer only about endurance. It was about proving again and again that survival belonged to those who adapted, who fought, who refused to yield. As another dawn broke the sky, bathed in light, the predator lifted its head and loosed a roar across the land. It was not the bellow of desperation, but the declaration of a survivor, a creature that had carved its place in the wild with tooth and claw. The sound rolled across the plain, scattering birds from the trees and silencing the morning chorus. Then it turned its gaze forward and moved on into the expanse. In that moment, the Allosaurus was not just another hunter of the age. It was a testament to the harsh truth of life itself. Strength was fleeting, power always challenged, yet survival belonged to those who could endure the storm and rise from it stronger. The plain swallowed its figure into the mist and light, but its story lingered, written not in words, but in scars and prints left in mud, and in the silence left by a fallen giant. The Allosaurus walked on a survivor in a world that demanded nothing less.